Okay, so now let's just shift gears a little bit and let's talk about some particular forms and applications of categories of universal ethics. And what I'm going to do here is I'm using some graphics that were created by a colleague of mine at Seton Hall Law School, Brian Shepard. Every summer, Brian teaches an Introduction to Justice session for our incoming law students. And he uses a book by Michael Sandel called Justice, which is a really good book. And Brian has given me permission to use these graphs in this video lecture with you. And I think they're really helpful. They track a lot of what's in our textbook in our chapter, but they apply it also to some other thinkers and concepts of justice. So you'll notice we have here three categories: welfare, utilitarianism, freedom-based approaches, and virtue ethics. So let's talk about these freedom-based approaches first. So our textbook talks quite a bit about Immanuel Kant, and rightly so. He is, as I mentioned before, and as the other videos that I gave you for this week demonstrate, he is a pivotal thinker in modern philosophy and modern ethical thought, and he is a thinker with which we have to grapple, even if ultimately we find that we have some disagreements with him. And as I mentioned before, in connection with the previous slides, Kant is seeking to ground philosophical thought, epistemology, ethics against forms of skepticism. And he's seeking to do it in a way that doesn't require reference to any specific religious dogma. And he ends up coming up with, or putting forth, what is called the categorical imperative. And the categorical imperative, as the text mentions, means that categorical means it applies to everyone everywhere. So he's trying to come up with rules that would apply, kind of rationally thought through, would apply to everyone everywhere. Now, he's not a natural law thinker, so he's not trying to derive these just from observing nature. But what he's trying to do is say, if I think about this rationally, this makes sense to apply this to everyone everywhere. So note that Kant is a deontological thinker, right? Deontology means that you're formulating your ethical thought with reference to rules that apply to everyone. So your text on page 123 and 124 lays out different formulations of the categorical imperative. So act only according to that maxim whereby you can at the same time will that it should become a universal law. Or act in such a way that you treat humanity, whether in your own person or in the person of any other, always at the same time as an end and never simply as a means. And all rational beings must so act as if they were through their maxims always legislating members in the universal kingdom of ends. So what is Kant getting at that? He's saying, if we're going to have a system of ethics that rationally makes sense, then we all ought to be putting forward acting in such ways that our actions would apply to everyone. They're kind of like rules that could apply to everybody. There are no rules that just apply to me. And every individual human being is his or her own means, not just an end to satisfy myself. Now, those all sound like very good principles, and I think they are very good principles in general. And as the text notes, they of course sound very much like parts of the Golden Rule that we find Jesus putting forth in the Gospels. Now, the issue that we might have, of course, is Kant is not grounding this in any kind of concept of God as a divine legislator, and he's not grounding it in any kind of concept of creation as having an order or something like that. And there are big questions about whether it really holds up rationally, whether it doesn't in fact beg some questions about realism and non-realism and so on. So that's one really broad, important approach. Another really broad, important approach under freedom-based approaches is we can put libertarianism. Now, you see a lot of libertarian type arguments in our contemporary American political debates. The Republican Party is not the Libertarian Party, but sometimes you'll hear arguments that sound very libertarian, especially from the more economically conservative ends of that party, and also from parts of the party that are interested in things like gun rights and things like that. Now, there are parts of Republican politics that shy away from libertarianism, and you'll hear the actual libertarian candidates say things like we ought to legalize drugs. Most Republican candidates won't quite say that for a variety of reasons. But the notion here is that the proper end of ethics is to maximize to the extent possible each individual person's autonomy. Right? It's an autonomy. We say in this slide here, a freedom-based approach. We might better say an autonomy-based approach. Now, it kind of recognizes that no one can have perfect autonomy because, I might feel like killing somebody, but I probably ought not generally to be free to do that because then I'm taking away someone else's autonomy, right? So the idea is, how do we balance out the best we can individual autonomy? So that's another approach. We also mention here John Rawls, and Rawls is really, really influential in contemporary philosophical ethics and jurisprudence. And Rawls's idea is really in many ways derived from Kant's. And what Rawls says is that we ought to make policy and law as if we were behind what he calls a veil of ignorance. And what he means by that is, I don't know the characteristics, the qualities of other people in society. I don't know whether they're more capable than me or less capable than me. I don't know whether they're better off than me or worse off than me. And given that, I can create a rule that would take all of that into account. And so therefore, I'm not going to necessarily overly favor myself or overly favor some other group. That's at least a, very broadly speaking, kind of a Rawlsian approach. And again, notice it's an autonomy-based approach. It's drawing off of Kant's ideas about the categorical imperative, and it's trying to put some more flesh on those bones.